Now, South Africa's President and Chairperson of SADC, Jacob Zuma, has called for a meeting to be had at the SADC Secretariat in Gaborone, Botswana, this afternoon. Rumours are abound that a compromise is on the cards with an aim towards installing a unity government. Ronak Gopaldas, who's a political analyst, is joining me now in the studio, as is Tamuka Chirimambowa, who is a PhD fellow at the University of Johannesburg. Ronak, let me begin with you. I mean, why do you think it's taking so long for us to hear what the deal is going to be?
I mean, after almost 4 decades of rule, any transition is going to be a difficult one to administer. And I think at the moment there's a lot of hysteria, there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of anxiety, there's a lot of excitement around what a post-Mugabe Zimbabwe looks like. A lot of this is, I think, quite misguided. A lot of people are thinking that, suddenly the country is going to be a different place. It's a silver bullet that's going to solve all of Zimbabwe's ills. It doesn't work like that. So I think it's going to be a bumpy road. In any event, when the military gets involved, it's a dangerous precedent. Zimbabwe's institutions are pretty weak. There's no precedent around such a change, and there's a lot of factionalism within the ZANU-PF party. So I think there needs to be a more temperate view around what this transition looks like. And I, for one, am not surprised that it's taking a while to get going.
So long. And Tamuka, just to bring you in here, regarding the future of Zimbabwe without President Mugabe, I mean, are we likely to see the start of a democracy there in Zimbabwe, or will it just essentially be a change in leadership?
Basically, whether we'll see a democracy or whether there's going to be a change in the leadership will depend on the steps that are going to be undertaken by the actors in Zimbabwe. But then to think that just President Mugabe's departure will bring democracy, that is total out of the question, because we are in this crisis because the military has always been a factor in our politics, a point that has been consistently denied by SADC, AU, and other actors, and to some extent the region in South Africa. So basically, this has now come out all bare is there. So the question whether President Mugabe goes will bring democracy or not is not as simple as that. Because even if you look, the same guys who are doing a coup to President Mugabe, they are the same guys who have been perpetuating his rule through the barrel of the gun and as well through hook and crook. So it's just, it will be just sugarcoating the whole problem. There still needs more to be done. But what I can hasten to say is that this offers an opportunity to make intervention. While there's still appetite to compromise and to negotiate, but otherwise just having a new dispensation with or maybe a new regime being put in place without addressing issues of transitional justice or issues of security sector reform, then the democracy question will continue being a part of it.
And Ronak, I know you've also got interesting views over whether this is a coup, because some say it is, some say it isn't. I mean, if it is, it's a very interesting one, because unlike in other countries, you haven't seen any bloodshed yet.
Yeah, I mean, the term that's being bandied about is that it's a soft coup, because the constitution hasn't been suspended and the military has gone to great lengths of saying that it's not a coup, and they haven't displaced President Mugabe yet. Look, I think either way, depending on which way you look at it, it can be a good coup because the military will be the ushers of democracy and then hand over to civilian rule, and therefore it's a short-term stopgap measure and paves the way for a better future for Zimbabwe. So that's what the advocates are saying. But, as I've said, any military intervention sets a very dangerous precedent and opens up a Pandora's box because there's a lot of scrambling for power, there's a lot of jockeying, it's very difficult to build consensus, and given the rampant factionalism, you could end up in a situation like you saw in Egypt, where, a year after the first civilian elected post-Mubarak government, they were overthrown in a coup. So, that perpetual cycle of military intervention, martial law in politics is something that I think we do need to be cautious about. In the Zimbabwean context, it's difficult to say which way it's going to go as yet. I think the military, as I've mentioned, have gone to great lengths to come out with sober rhetoric to say that, it's just a temporary measure. And, there are question marks around their capacity to actually run a government. But how they navigate this transition and how they manage the various competing factions within the ZANU-PF and within the country is going to be very important to see how this transition actually plays out.
It looks like they're doing a pretty good job in terms of managing those fractions, because we did have the Youth League president there apologizing for essentially being disobedient to the military. But Tamuka, let me bring you back in. There's a lot of speculation making the rounds on social media about what this new transitional government may likely look like. We've got the president or the man who's seen to be the future president being Emmerson Mnangagwa, his vice president, or two of his vice presidents, Ms. Mujuru and Dabengwa, and Prime Minister Chivangarai for the next 5 years. I mean, I don't know if you've seen this, but in terms of getting these leaders who come from different parties all under one umbrella, is this likely to work?
Yeah, I think there is no smoke without fire. If that list, yes, I've seen it has been circulating, but what I can say about that list, if you look at the events preceding to this, there have been talks underway going through between these parties in Zimbabwe, and in particular the war veterans, as early as April, February, March, April, they've been starting to reach out to other parties when they realize that President Mugabe is not going to want to go. So that list, if it ends up coming out like that, it might not be surprising. But I think the list on its own, in that current architecture, would be limited, because it's actually focusing on what one of my fellow panelists was saying on another short take. It focuses on the tallest trees in the forest and ignores the shorter trees and the grass. It needs to be broadened, because basically what Zimbabwe needs is some kind of a CODESA type of talks, or what we may call a second kind of Lancaster talks, whereby you have to craft a new vision so that the issues which are underlying, which I've actually noted, the issue of security sector reform, the issue of transitional justice, the issue of the new dispensation, the governance architecture, becomes addressed not necessarily by just assembling or rearranging chairs and bringing different political parties, then you call it a government of national unity, and then you go for a transitional authority. That would be much more of an elite pact, which will simply assuage the interests of the elites without taking the ordinary man on the ground, or the ordinary citizen who is suffering from this current economic and political malaise.
And Ronak, the rumors there on social media are this team that's being put together, or the shares being reshuffled, as Tamuka said, is being tasked with restoring Zimbabwe to investment grade, to a growth path. I mean, if you had the privilege, or if you were asked to sit on that board of how to get Zimbabwe back to growth again, and asked, what kind of policy should we be doing, what kind of things should we be communicating to business, what would you say?
So I think before we get there, it's important to discount fake news, right? We're living in an era where there's a lot of rumor mongering, there's a lot of speculation, there's a lot of gossip, and seeing Morgan Tsvangirai name on that list, given his health concerns, is it raises eyebrows for me, for one. I think before we also get to the silver bullet kind of scenario where Zimbabwe is miraculously going to have a turnaround, let's take stock of what needs to happen before then. So first of all, what's going to happen to the Mugabes? Are they going to get a dignified exit, an exile kind of package, and how is this transition going to be settled? Secondly, under the constitution, the vice president is meant to take over. He doesn't have the power base. Now, a transitional government therefore becomes a more palatable scenario. And then SADC and the AU need to play a diplomatic role in ensuring that all stakeholders are brought on board. Now, going forward, there's still domestic issues that need to be solved. The ZANU-PF is meant to have an elective conference in December. There's meant to be a national election next year. Now, are those still going to happen?
According to the fake news, no.
So lots of uncertainty there still. But, if you are a new administration coming in, the one issue that needs to be addressed is reform. And speculation is that Emmerson Mnangagwa, who's the front runner now to take over under a new government, is more pragmatic, is more reform-oriented than the current administration. And I think any new political administration which is more palatable in the eyes of the international community will pave the way for re-engagement, for reinvestment, for the lifting of sanctions, for the resumption of donor aid. And as we know, Zimbabwe has a lot of human capital. So down the line, I think that's something that will play a big role. But at the moment, institutions are still underdeveloped, and any change will be incremental rather than wholesale. So I think these ideas of a Zimbabwean miracle and a rapid turnaround, I think, are a bit far-fetched in my book.
And Tamuka, how do you interpret the apology from the Youth League leader there this morning or late last night to the military for essential disobedience? Do you see this as the Generation 40 camp sort of falling in a line, and the fractions there that are being talked about at ZANU-PF being mended?
Basically, it's not that G40 is realigning. And basically, I think that is one of the concerns regarding this coup, which people want to call a military takeover, a soft coup. A coup is a coup. But it actually raises questions, because when he is apologizing, being made to apologize in national television, he's apologizing in his capacity. And what we are not sure is whether that was out of voluntary, it was a voluntary apology, or it was a coerced apology. So basically, it raises some gray areas which need to be addressed. And as for G40, I don't see them being realigned within, because this was a high-stakes game where both factions, it actually went for the complete obliteration of each other. But in this case, it has happened that then the Lacoste faction, backed by the military, has managed to prevail over G40. So basically, I don't see G40 being realigned, but I see G40 actually falling out of the way, because if President Mugabe goes, then that means the end of G40. And what G40 the best can do is to try and make sure that there is not going to be any retribution. But if anything has to be raised or done to G40, it has to be in accordance with the law, whether they call them corrupt criminals and so forth. Let the law take its own course. And this is not the domain of the military, it's the domain of the police. And so basically, that's what I can say. I don't think it was an honest apology from my front, but anyway, it has happened.
Well, Tamuka, we'll leave it there. Thank you so much for your time. I will also say goodbye to Ronak Gopaldas, a political economist, and that, of course, was Tamuka Chirimambowa, who is a PhD fellow at the University of Johannesburg.